In the early 20th century, China was a nation in great turmoil. The old empire had fallen. New ideas were clashing with ancient traditions, and honestly, the country was divided. Warlords controlled different regions, and the national government struggled to hold everything together. Amidst this chaos, the need for a stable and unified country was stronger than ever. A key part of building a modern nation was creating a modern economy. And, a strong economy needed a reliable currency. People needed to trust the money they used every day. This was the world into which the idea of the gold yuan was born. It was a bold plan for a difficult time. The story of the gold yuan begins not with gold, but with paper and silver. For centuries, China's monetary system was incredibly complex. It was a confusing mix of silver taels, copper coins, and various banknotes issued by different banks and provinces. This system made trade difficult. Imagine trying to buy something when the value of your money changed from one town to the next. The nationalist government, known as the Kuomintang, or KMT, knew this had to change. They dreamed of a modern China. A modern China needed a single, unified currency that everyone could trust and use, from the bustling streets of Shanghai to the quiet rural villages. This dream led to the creation of the Fabi, or legal tender notes, in 1935. This was a major step. The government took control of the money supply, moving away from silver. But the world was on the brink of another great war. Soon, China was plunged into a long and brutal conflict with Japan. Wars are incredibly expensive. To pay for soldiers, weapons, and supplies, the government had to print more and more money. This constant printing caused the value of the paper Fabi to plummet. People's life savings were wiped out. The economic chaos only grew worse, and faith in the government's money was disappearing fast. It was in this desperate situation that the government turned to a powerful, ancient symbol of wealth: gold. The idea was simple but ambitious. They would create a new currency, the gold yuan, supposedly backed by the government's gold reserves. It was introduced in August 1948, a last-ditch effort to save the economy from complete collapse. The government hoped that the magic of gold would restore people's faith. They hoped it would stop the runaway inflation and bring stability back to the nation. The gold yuan was not just a coin, it was a promise of a better, more stable future. But it was a promise made in the darkest of times. The primary reason for creating the gold yuan was to fight a monster called hyperinflation. Imagine going to the market in the morning with a wallet full of money, and then by the afternoon, that same amount of money could barely buy a loaf of bread. This was the reality in China in the late 1940s. The value of the old paper currency, the Fabi, was evaporating. Prices were doubling in a matter of hours, not days. People were carrying cartloads of banknotes just to buy basic groceries. This economic chaos was destroying society. The government needed to do something dramatic to stop the bleeding. Gold has always held a special power in the minds of people. Throughout history, gold has been seen as real, tangible wealth. It does not rust or decay. Its supply is limited. Unlike paper money, which a government can print endlessly, gold is rare and precious. The KMT government hoped to tap into this deep psychological trust in gold. By calling the new currency the gold yuan, they were trying to convince the public that this money was different. They wanted people to believe it was as good as gold itself. This was a powerful marketing tool in a time of deep economic fear and uncertainty. Another key reason was to consolidate the government's control over the nation's wealth. To launch the gold yuan, the government made a drastic move. It outlawed the private ownership of gold, silver, and foreign currency. Citizens were ordered to turn in their precious metals and foreign money to the state in exchange for the new gold yuan notes. This was a way for the struggling government to gather all the real assets into its own hands. It was a desperate attempt to refill its empty coffers. The government needed this wealth to continue funding its war against the communist forces, which was raging across the country. The gold yuan was also a political tool. By introducing a new currency, the KMT was trying to project an image of strength and competence. They wanted to show the Chinese people and the world that they were still in control and capable of governing. A stable currency would be a powerful symbol of a functioning state. It was a gamble. If the gold yuan succeeded, it could restore public confidence and give the government a fighting chance. If it failed, it would be a catastrophic blow to its credibility, one from which it might never recover. The fate of the currency and the fate of the government were now tied together. The gold yuan was born into a storm. It was introduced in August 1948, right in the middle of the Chinese Civil War. The nationalist government of Chiang Kai-shek was locked in a life-or-death struggle against the communist forces led by Mao Zedong. This war was the single most important factor in the life of the gold yuan. Wars consume vast amounts of resources. The government needed money for everything: paying soldiers, buying ammunition, and transporting supplies. The financial pressure was immense. The gold reserves that were supposed to back the new currency were quickly being spent on the war effort. The introduction of the gold yuan was met with immediate suspicion and resistance. People had just seen their savings in the old Fabi currency become worthless. They were hesitant to trust another form of paper money, even if it was called the gold yuan. Many ordinary citizens and savvy business owners chose to defy the government's orders. They hid their gold, silver, and US dollars instead of exchanging them for the new notes. This meant that the government failed to collect as much real wealth as it had hoped. The foundation of the new currency was weak from the very start. As the civil war turned against the nationalists, the situation went from bad to worse. The communist armies were winning major victories and capturing large territories. With every city that fell, the government's tax base shrank and its expenses grew. To cover the shortfall, the government did the one thing the gold yuan was supposed to prevent. It started printing money. And it printed money at a frenzied, uncontrollable pace. The initial promises of a limited, gold-backed currency were abandoned. The printing presses ran day and night, churning out notes with ever larger denominations. The gold yuan was falling into the same trap as the Fabi. The result was a complete economic meltdown. The hyperinflation that the gold yuan was meant to cure came back with a vengeance. It became even worse than before. Prices skyrocketed to astronomical levels. The value of the gold yuan collapsed completely. People lost all faith in the currency. In less than a year, the gold yuan went from being a symbol of hope to a symbol of failure. Its dramatic and rapid collapse mirrored the military and political collapse of the nationalist government on the mainland. The economic storm had finally consumed the golden dream. For ordinary people, the arrival of the gold yuan brought a brief moment of hope, followed by a long period of despair. At first, the government set a fixed exchange rate. 1 gold yuan was supposed to be worth a certain amount of gold. People were forced to exchange their life savings, their gold wedding bands, and their silver dollars for this new paper money. For a few short weeks, it seemed like stability might return. Shopkeepers accepted the new notes, and for a moment, the frantic pace of rising prices slowed down. People dared to believe that their money might hold its value from one day to the next. This stability, however, was a mirage. As the government printed more money to fund the war, the real value of the gold yuan began to drop. In the marketplace, this created chaos. Shopkeepers had to change their prices multiple times a day. Soon, many refused to accept the gold yuan notes altogether. They preferred to barter, trading goods directly for other goods. A bag of rice became more valuable than a stack of paper money. The economy reverted to a more primitive state. Daily life became a constant struggle for survival, where securing food and essential supplies was the only thing that mattered. Inside the home, the collapse of the gold yuan was a personal tragedy for millions of families. People who had followed the law and turned in their gold and silver found themselves left with worthless paper. Their life savings were gone. Stories abounded of families who had been prosperous one month and were destitute the next. The economic stress tore families apart. It eroded trust not only in the government, but also in the very idea of money. People learned a hard lesson. The only things of real value were tangible assets like land, food, and precious metals that you could hold in your hand. The experience had a profound psychological impact on a whole generation. It created a deep-seated distrust of paper currency and government economic promises. People who lived through the hyperinflation of the late 1940s would forever be cautious about saving in paper money. They would prefer to invest in gold, real estate, or other physical assets. This collective memory of economic trauma would influence financial behavior in Chinese communities for decades to come. The story of the gold yuan in daily life is a stark reminder of how quickly economic stability can vanish and how devastating the consequences can be for ordinary people. Beyond the official history books, the story of the gold yuan is, honestly, just filled with fascinating anecdotes that really reveal the human side of the crisis. One popular story tells of the so-called rice riots in major cities like Shanghai. As the value of the gold yuan plummeted, the price of rice, the staple food for so many, just shot up. People would line up for hours outside stores, clutching bags of nearly worthless banknotes. And, when the stores ran out of rice or simply refused to sell, desperation quickly turned to anger. Crowds would storm the shops and riots would break out. These events showed, in no uncertain terms, that the economic crisis was also a crisis of hunger and survival. Another interesting aspect was the rise of the black market. While the government demanded that all gold and silver be turned in, a thriving underground economy emerged. Clandestine traders, known as yellow fish, risked arrest and even execution to buy and sell gold and US dollars. These black market rates were, honestly, the true measure of the gold yuan's value. While the official rate was fixed, the black market rate changed by the hour, really reflecting the public's utter lack of faith in the paper currency. For many, trusting a yellow fish was a better bet than trusting the government's bank. There are also tales of, incredible creativity born from desperation. With banknotes becoming so worthless, people found other uses for them. It was said that the cost of the paper and ink to print a banknote was sometimes higher than its face value. People would reportedly use stacks of low-denomination notes as fuel for their stoves, since it was actually cheaper than buying firewood. Others used them as wallpaper, or even for wrapping fish. These stories, whether they're entirely true or maybe a bit exaggerated, paint a vivid picture of a world turned upside down, where money had lost all meaning and function. One of the most poignant symbols of the era was the gold yuan shoe. As the nationalist government prepared to flee the mainland for Taiwan in 1949, vast quantities of gold were secretly moved out of the country. Rumors and legends spread about this so-called lost treasure. One such story involved hollowed-out shoes and belts where people would hide their last few gold bars or US dollars. The gold yuan notes they were forced to leave behind were, completely worthless. Their only hope for starting a new life was the real, physical gold they could manage to smuggle out with them. This image captures, I think, the ultimate failure of the gold yuan people, trusted gold hidden in a shoe more than the official currency of their country. The design of the gold yuan notes was intended to inspire confidence. The early issues featured a portrait of Sun Yat-sen, the revered founding father of the Republic of China. His image was meant to evoke a sense of nationalism, stability, and legitimacy. The notes were intricately printed, with detailed patterns and watermarks designed to prevent counterfeiting. They came in various denominations, from small cents to larger yuan values. The initial design was clean and professional, mimicking the currencies of major Western powers. The government wanted the money to look and feel important, hoping its appearance would help build trust. However, as hyperinflation took hold, the face of the gold yuan changed dramatically. The government was forced to issue notes with increasingly higher denominations. What started with 1, 5, and 10 yuan notes quickly escalated. Soon, there were 100, 500, and 1,000 yuan notes. Then came the 10,000, 50,000, and 100,000 yuan notes. The numbers became absurd. Towards the end, the government was printing notes with face values in the millions. These high-denomination notes were often printed hastily and with poor quality, a physical manifestation of the economic chaos they represented. The materials and printing quality also deteriorated over time. The first gold yuan notes were printed on relatively good quality paper by reputable printing companies. As the crisis deepened and the need for cash became more desperate, the government had to cut corners. Later batches were printed on cheaper, flimsier paper. The printing was sometimes sloppy, with colors and alignment being inconsistent. Some notes were even printed locally by different provincial banks, leading to variations in design. The currency itself began to look as worthless as its purchasing power had become. The most significant change was not in its physical design, but in its fundamental promise. The gold yuan was introduced with the pledge that it was backed by gold. The total amount issued was supposed to be strictly limited. This promise was broken almost immediately. The government secretly printed far more money than it had gold to back. The value was no longer tied to gold, it was tied to the government's printing press. This shift from a supposedly gold-backed currency to a purely fiat currency, printed without restraint, was the ultimate change that sealed its fate and led to its spectacular collapse. The final collapse of the gold yuan was swift and total. By the spring of 1949, less than a year after its introduction, the currency was in a state of freefall. The nationalist armies were suffering devastating defeats on the battlefield. As the communist forces advanced, control of major economic centers was lost. The government of the Republic of China was in full retreat, moving its capital multiple times before eventually fleeing the mainland entirely. With the government that issued the currency disappearing, any remaining shred of confidence in the gold yuan evaporated. In the final months, the economy descended into a state of pure barter. Money ceased to function as a medium of exchange. Salaries were sometimes paid in goods, such as sacks of flour or bolts of cloth, if they were paid at all. People with anything of value, food, tools, foreign currency, hoarded it. The gold yuan notes, even those with huge denominations, were just pieces of paper. The hyperinflation reached a point where prices were changing by the minute. The dream of a stable, unified currency had turned into a nationwide economic nightmare from which there was no escape. In July 1949, the government, now confined to a few remaining areas in the south, officially abandoned the gold yuan. They attempted to introduce yet another currency, the silver yuan, but it was far too late. The economic and political credibility of the nationalist government on the mainland was completely destroyed. The Communist Party, upon taking control of cities, quickly moved to replace the worthless gold yuan with their own currency, the renminbi. For the vast majority of Chinese people, the gold yuan era was over. It ended not with a gradual decline, but with a sudden and catastrophic implosion. When the nationalist government retreated to the island of Taiwan, they took with them the country's remaining gold reserves. This gold, which was supposed to have backed the gold yuan for all of China, became the foundation for a new currency on the island, the new Taiwan dollar. This move was crucial for stabilizing Taiwan's economy in the following decades. But it was a bitter irony. The gold that was collected from people all over China in exchange for worthless paper ended up securing the future of a government on a small island, leaving hundreds of millions on the mainland to deal with the economic wreckage. After its collapse in 1949, the gold yuan became a ghost currency. For decades, the notes were nothing more than worthless remnants of a chaotic past. They were symbols of economic ruin and a failed government. Many were destroyed, used as fuel, or simply thrown away. They served as a painful reminder for a generation that had lost everything. In the early years of the People's Republic of China, possessing items associated with the old nationalist regime was often politically dangerous. So many more notes likely disappeared for this reason as well. They were relics of a history that many wanted to forget. However, as time passed and China began to open up to the world, interest in its history grew. The dramatic story of the gold yuan started to attract the attention of historians and numismatists, people who study and collect currency. The worthless pieces of paper began to acquire a new kind of value. They were no longer money, but historical artifacts. Each note, with its portrait of Sun Yat-sen and its astronomical denomination, told a powerful story about one of the most turbulent periods in modern Chinese history. Collectors began to seek them out, preserving them as windows into the past. Today, gold yuan banknotes are popular items in the world of numismatics. Their value as collectibles depends on several factors, such as their denomination, condition, and rarity. The extremely high denomination notes, like the 1 million or 5 million yuan notes, are often the most sought after. They are the most dramatic symbols of the hyperinflation that destroyed the currency. Uncirculated notes that are crisp and clean are more valuable than those that are worn and torn. Certain rare printings or error notes can also command high prices among serious collectors. The market for these notes is global. Collectors from China, the United States, Europe, and beyond are fascinated by their story. They are sold at auctions, by specialized dealers, and on online marketplaces. For a relatively small amount of money, anyone can own a tangible piece of this dramatic economic history. Holding a 5 million yuan note that was once not even enough to buy a single grain of rice is a powerful and humbling experience. It transforms the gold yuan from a failed currency into a successful and fascinating collectible. The legacy of the gold yuan is, first and foremost, a cautionary tale. It stands as one of history's most spectacular examples of hyperinflation and currency collapse. It serves as a stark warning to governments everywhere about the dangers of printing money without restraint to pay for wars or cover up economic problems. The story shows how quickly public trust, once lost, can lead to a complete breakdown of the economic and social order. Economists and historians Study the gold yuan to understand the mechanics of hyperinflation and the devastating consequences it has on society. For the Chinese people, the gold yuan left a deep cultural scar. The memory of carts full of worthless money and the loss of life savings fostered a profound and lasting suspicion of paper currency and government financial management. This inflation phobia has influenced savings habits for generations. It helps explain the traditionally high savings rates in many Chinese communities and the strong cultural preference for investing in tangible assets like gold, jade, and real estate. These are seen as safer stores of value that cannot be devalued by a printing press. The ghost of the gold yuan still quietly shapes financial decisions today. The story also had a significant political legacy. The economic chaos and corruption associated with the gold yuan's collapse severely undermined the legitimacy of the nationalist government. It was a major factor in the KMT losing the support of the urban middle class and intellectuals, pushing many to see the communists as a more viable and disciplined alternative. The Communist Party, in its rise to power, used the KMT's economic failure as powerful propaganda. The ability to control inflation and provide economic stability became a cornerstone of the new government's claim to legitimacy after 1949. Ultimately, the gold yuan is a story about the power of trust. Money, in the end, is a social contract. It has value only because we collectively agree that it does. The gold yuan was an attempt to create that trust by invoking the magic of gold. But when the government broke its promise and violated that trust, the magic disappeared, and the paper became worthless. The legacy of the gold yuan is a timeless lesson on the fragile nature of money and the absolute importance of credibility and faith in holding a nation's economy and its society together. It is a story not just about gold or yuan, but about the human obsession with creating a symbol of value we can all believe in.